Well, listen, every time you open a newspaper at the moment, it seems a footballer has been accused of rape. Or if not violence against women, kicking cats. The repugnant and repeated horrific behaviours of multi-millionaire sportsmen seems to not only be kind of accepted in sport in general, but allegedly covered up by their teams and clubs. Well, today, a trio of women's rights groups have called time on the pandemic of sexual abuse in football and have written an open letter to the Premier League and the FA demanding action. Quite right, too. The skin-crawling spectacle of overpaid men taking the knee and decrying racist tweets looks worse than sickeningly hypocritical when set against the backdrop of the deafening silence surrounding repeated and revolting abuse of women. Surely it's time for zero tolerance, however big the star. Well, joining us now on the show is domestic abuse survivor and campaigner Zoe Dronfield. Zoe, as a survivor, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, it's pretty harrowing when you see day after day after day allegations of this, frankly, dreadful behaviour towards women from big Premier League footballers, and yet it keeps going on and no one's taking the knee for that.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite right what you say. You know, the double standards of it is unbelievable, really. The fact that they're, on one respect, they're trying to put out this reputation that they're taking their knee and they care about these social things. However, violence against women and girls is almost accepted. You know, why are we giving these celebrity statuses to young men that don't seem to understand what a healthy relationship is? And I really think that the associations, they've got to take some responsibility for this.
I mean, is it not the problem that essentially these are incredibly young men who are suddenly cast into the realms of millionaires being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds per week, which to lots of women out there is actually the keys to the kingdom if they manage to bag a footballer. But it seems to me that every single time this comes out, the newspapers report on it. The big football associations don't do anything. What would you like to see them do?
Well, I think the open letter that's being sent to them, let's hear the response. You know, what are they going to actually do about this? Because they have a responsibility. These young men are role models for the next generation of young men, and it's not good enough. And they have a responsibility. They're going through their ranks. So it is down to them. They must get involved.
Do you think this is a problem that affects football in particular, simply down to perhaps the huge sums involved, maybe the nature and backgrounds of some of the players? You know, people often say it's a gentleman's sport played by hooligans, whereas rugby is a hooligan sport played by gentlemen, although there's been plenty of incidents of pretty unpalatable behaviour in rugby union football and rugby league as well. But it does seem to be something that affects football especially. Do you think there's a connection there with just the sheer sums of money these people are paid, and that sort of gifts them a sense of impunity when it comes to their behaviour?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they've got hugely inflated egos. And this is why education is key, and the football associations need to step in and ensure that those egos are, deflated, if you like, because, you know, yes, they might have large sums of money. However, they have an entire future ahead of them, and that career can be cut short very quickly, and especially due to these kind of offences. It's disgusting.
I mean, there are people out there who say that football actually has a massively pernicious influence on men in general, men and boys in general, considering there are so many amongst their fans. Do you think it is time that football is the sport that takes the lead on this?
Well, I mean, it is probably the most prominent sport on TV. So, yes, I do. Yeah, they should be making a stance.
And in terms of, you know, when you look at this culture erupting in sport, is this something that you think is relatively new and happening increasingly in society? Or do you think there's always been this problem when it comes to sports stars, celebrities, essentially exploiting what they think are their rights, given their particular social status?
I don't think it is just football, you know, across singers, boxers, it's across everywhere. I mean, look, this is male violence, right? So that's what we need to address. There is certain pockets of society that believe that this kind of behaviour is okay. And we need to stamp that out. And the more we can talk about it, the better. You know, my son is 17. He's a young lad, and these are the kind of role models. It's not good enough. It's not acceptable to me as a mother.
Zoe, I couldn't agree more. Zoe Dronfield, thank you so much for coming on. Zoe is a domestic abuse survivor and now a campaigner. Well, Ben, finally, what are your thoughts on this? Because, I mean, I'm horrified every time I open the newspaper. And it's every day now. It seems every day that a sportsman has done something utterly reprehensible. The kicking cat video today has everybody up in arms. I mean, what's going to happen to that guy? He's going to be paid millions of pounds still and kick cats and footballs, you know.
Yeah, apparently he's still playing against Watford later on tonight, although who knows if he'll get dropped before tonight. But, it doesn't seem that he's faced the comeuppance that we would have expected. But I think one of the problems is you get these young kids, often from certain deprived backgrounds, suddenly rocketing to fame and extreme wealth. And sometimes they're 17, 18 years old and they're suddenly really desirable, very wealthy, having gone from sort of being nothing, sort of zero to hero overnight. And sometimes that sort of goes to their head a bit and they just go a bit mad. And it's, where is the pastoral care within football to make sure that people who go from that sort of small to very big sort of character overnight are being sort of told how to behave and deal with it? A lot of other sports deal with this a lot better, like rugby, for example. They have a culture there where they make sure that young kids going into rugby, getting a career in rugby, they go to university, they marry young or whatever it is. There's a pastoral care there which keeps them quite stable, keeps them on a stable path. So they're not just going extremely wealthy and then they're surrounded by women and there's, extremely famous overnight and just lose the ability, lose perspective and forget about the fact that they actually need to behave like decent human beings.
I mean, how on earth can, the big football organisations and the clubs themselves justify their inactivity for so long on this?
Well, because I think there is a culture in football which has been for a long time of this sort of thing happening. You have your characters like George Best back in the day, boozing and womanising, all the rest of it. The problem is now that it's a lot younger, a lot wealthier, because there's a lot more money in football now. So it's on a much higher, much more stratospheric scale. It does need to be dealt with, but it doesn't just need to be dealt with within football, within the FA, within the Premier League. I think there's a bigger cultural issue at play here. For example, a lot of footballers come from more deprived backgrounds than other sports, like cricket or rugby, for example. They tend to be more from working class backgrounds, or they come from certain kinds of communities where they don't have the same level of support. They don't have stable family lives or whatever else, and or they don't have good schooling, good sort of role models, or the rest of it. So I think you need to go to the root. You need to solve the issues on a cultural and a social level as well as within football.
Do you think it'd be reasonable for football managers to say to their players, look, you're paid millions, you're in a really privileged position, you're going to be rich beyond your wildest dreams, just stop going out on Friday and Saturday nights, try and live a more socially conservative lifestyle? Would that actually be imposing things unnecessarily on young men?
I think, to some degree, you do have to say they need a father figure, or almost they need someone to just say to them, right, focus on your football, focus on your job. You can go off and do what you want to do when you retire or when you're a bit older, but at the moment you just need to, not let it go to your head. You've got extremely wealthy overnight, you're suddenly, in demand. Every, pop star and musician wants to party with you, and you sort of, it goes to their head a little bit, and I think they get a sort of lost under the tide of their newfound fame and wealth. And if you had more pastoral care within football teams, I think that wouldn't happen.
And why do you think it is that, something as, gnawingly vile as violence against women, rape for crying out loud, is eclipsed by protests about racist tweets?
Yeah, no, the sort of the racism thing in football, I think, has been to some degree overplayed, especially since the taking the knee. We've actually seen a spike in racism in football because people sort of react to that sort of outward display. I think if things were done more internally rather than outward displays, which are effectively virtue signalling displays, if things are actually being done internally to prevent that from happening, it would be a lot more effective.
Yeah, you got some good ideas there, Ben. Thank you so much for joining me today and your very sensible and pragmatic input on all of our topics.